couple months in, we've uh, gone about as much tariff coverage as we've been able to do these last few days here in Bakersfield, talking with people on the street, speaking with economists. We want to focus to another big issue that was one of the president's biggest electoral talking points going into office, which was on immigration. And then now that we're a few months in, we're starting to see those first numbers originally from February, where we saw border crossings lower than 8,000, which has been a big plus for the president and something that he's been talking a lot about. In the same respect, too, that doesn't come with the somewhat controversial way of some of the how some of the deportations have been taking place, and then also, of course, some specific cases as well involving some recent college students, some definitely progressive protesters that have foreign ties, and of course, students across the country as well, where we've seen House representatives have been talking for some time about having visas revoked in case people were speaking out against and making anti-American speech. And we've been seeing a little bit about that with the number of visas being revoked for students at certain universities. So I'm going to go with the wrong question to ask, but maybe it's a good way to start as far as a summary letter grade answer. How has the Trump administration done so far? Have they kept their word on this so far? Tim, I will start with you. What's the letter grade so far in Trump's education, or excuse me, execution of border crossings?
I think the grade has to be A plus because he's delivered exactly what he said he would do, and in fact, kind of gone above and beyond in terms of border crossings. So everything that I've seen, that's the grade that I would give him, and I think probably the American people would as well, regardless of which side you may fall on. It certainly was one of those issues that voters did vote for the president, on based on, immigration and border security. And so it was, priority of his right out of the box with Department of Homeland Security and Border Patrol putting those positions in place and taking a pretty hard line. And by all accounts, it seems that the tactics and what the policies that have been implemented since the president took office have worked. And hopefully those continue long term.
Tal, your thoughts on that as well? What's a good grade for you?
Yeah, it feels like it's, an A plus with his supporters, an F with his detractors, and kind of most importantly, I'd say a B plus for those folks that are in the middle, the ones that are going to ultimately decide if Republicans control Congress, and then Republicans if they're going to win the presidency again in 3.5 years or more. So I think with many of the folks that were frustrated by the Biden administration's handling of that particular issue, what they're hearing now is, I mean, for some sort of real world examples, deporting 240 some odd, kind of hardened gang members with a couple of mistakes in there. If there were some folks that were kind of, scooped up with that group and shouldn't have been, I think for most voters, especially if you're in the Midwest and those, string of states that decide the presidential elections, you think, all right, it's 235 really bad guys and a couple of folks that their, mistakes were made. Again, I'd hate to be one of those folks that were apprehended inappropriately, but I think the American people will give the Trump administration some grace on that. And then when you're hearing with these kind of what I think most people would believe are maybe a little bit entitled Ivy League educated students that are pitching fits and have the privilege of being in this country, again, I don't know how much sympathy you get outside of college professors and super high propensity Democrats that are going to, sort of have more feelings towards the Trump administration's handling of those students. But most folks in Wisconsin and Michigan and wherever else, I don't think they get a lot of sympathy for people that are being, really over the top provocative and at times disruptive. And they're, on a temporary student visa. I don't think there's a lot of folks that are going to be really heartbroken about those folks losing that privilege. And maybe that's right or wrong. I just, again, for the people that are going to decide elections, especially in a real competitive environment, I don't see them falling on the Democratic side of that particular issue at this time.
Well, Tim, I think that there's almost a whole, I think there's maybe even some from the Democratic side and Republican side, they kind of agree about this one reform of education as far as college acceptances go. And this goes for the Ivy League schools, those schools that are tough to get into, a number of these UCs where people don't like the DEI as far as that's concerned with admissions process. They think that that has slanted things a little bit. Maybe that's more on the Republican side of the aisle, conservative side of the aisle. But in the same time, too, I think this crosses over a little bit of both, where Democrats and Republicans don't also like legacy admissions in that same respect as well. And now you have a situation where you have students that many will think, well, they're not appreciating what they've been given by going to this university, by being accepted there. They don't appreciate that opportunity. So therefore, there's other deserving people in the United States of several different backgrounds that would be a better or more worthy choice to go to that university than one of these kids from abroad, or also one of these legacy admissions as well. Is that kind of the? It feels like that's why this is not taking on as much as it had been probably in the past.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, just like Tal said, you've got these, kind of this sense of entitlement coming out of college campuses, which certainly protests at college campuses isn't new, right? I mean, these are long held traditions we've seen in kind of American politics, going back to decades, and I think a peak in the late 1960s, certainly during the Vietnam War. Now we're kind of seeing it, really kind of reassert itself. But it's a different and new dynamic, especially with some of these students who are, foreign nationals, and they are, here in this country, and taking part and participating in, privileges that some students and families and people in this country don't necessarily have. These schools and four-year universities have become incredibly competitive to get into. And so when you see individuals that aren't really appreciating what they have, and really using it as a platform to kind of talk down to the country that has kind of given them so much, you're not going to get a lot of sympathy from average middle class voters, and especially when you see in a situation like we're in currently, where you've got all of this attention paid to four-year universities, and you have students again that are trying to get into these incredibly competitive schools and universities, and also then a need for more and more kind of trade and career technical education institutions and those types of things, where you've got students who want to learn a trade and want to be able to participate in the economy on that level, and asking elected officials, hey, for more support into some of those educational opportunities. So you're not gonna get a sympathetic Midwestern, even on the coast, from East Coast and West Coast. A lot of those folks are going to look at the these universities and college students that are kind of kind of protesting and doing that kind of thing, and there's going to be some raised eyebrows and shaking of heads.
Well, and it's also difficult to kind of link the experience of the kids that are going to those privileged universities and the privileges that they have to the people that, have come to this country perhaps illegally, but also maybe those that are on visas that could be expiring in the Central Valley from a totally different economic class, with the exception of maybe some students from that background who happen to go to those universities. Um, Outside of that, there's not much commonalities between the two, and they're very different issues. And for folks in the Central Valley, it seems like it's more relatable and more wanting to get visas done through that way. But in the same respect, when it comes to this issue on college campuses, there's really no linkage about who about going through a similar plight, Tal.
Yeah, I mean, put simply, if you're coming to our country, um, and maybe even building a family here and making investments, and you're solving problems or starting businesses, or for that matter, you're doing work in agriculture that Americans have, for the most part, indicated that they don't want to do. I know and I believe many of the American people are going to look upon you in a very different fashion than importing people to be provocative on college campuses while we're all at work all day. Like, I don't think we need any more of that. And maybe it's romantic, and like it's probably a lot of fun, but like I just don't I would rather that spot be taken by, again, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, again, someone that is going to be doing something that there's a need for in our country. I feel bad if those folks lose their visas, but it's a privilege to be here. And I don't know that we need to be importing protesters. I just don't think I care enough as an American. I'd rather we fill a spot that's so desperately needed with a good person from somewhere else on planet Earth. And we've got like plenty of protesters on both sides of the aisle. I don't think we need to import more.
And I think maybe that's the point to go to Tim as far as the messaging is concerned, as far as the people that have been deported so far. I know if you're looking at that small number of people that maybe were not supposed to be in that group that was sent to El Salvador and whatnot, does it matter how it doesn't matter how the Trump administration says sorry or not sorry about that situation as it comes to votes in the midterms, or is this still such an issue that Americans were fed up for so long that maybe they're like, you know what? This had gotten so bad that we were not concerned about that one or two people that's in that group because things had been so bad for so long, over 100,000 crossings a month under the Biden administration average, sometimes even more. Uh, is that kind of a symptom of the situation, Tim?
Well, voters vote in their self-interest. So those unfortunate situations that may have occurred were, small, and it really doesn't impact most Americans and most voters. Sure, they feel bad about it, but when it comes to casting their vote in an upcoming election, they're going to be much more concerned with, things like cost of living, or immediate impacts to their safety. Those are the things that they're going to be looking at in terms of how they're going to cast their vote in the upcoming 2026 elections. It's going to be very self-centered. I mean, that's just how voters are, and that's okay. But it just goes to some of those other issues, and I think the Trump administration knows that it's sure, those are unfortunate, and yes, I think the media is going to point those situations out, but it's not going to be something that most voters really care about to the degree that it's going to impact their future vote.
And it
And
may not be so. Oh yeah, go ahead, Tal.
on that front, this format's kind of fun because we can kind of dive into these things a little bit. So take those few examples, right? Whether it was two, five, half a dozen, whatever it was, that were apprehended when they should not have been. Maybe they were American citizens, maybe they were on a different type of visa. It was a mistake because the type of tattoo they have or the group that they had identified or that they were identified with. That is a huge problem. I mean, I was pretty young, but like Elian Gonzalez, effectively one person and a picture railroaded attempts at the time, I think the Clinton administration, to do a lot of the work that we're talking about now. So it's not lost on me how important those mistakes are. Candidly, if those groups were smart, they'd hire someone like Tim, and if they didn't have enough money, maybe they'd hire someone like me to highlight those mistakes, right? That can blow this whole thing up. That could be an Achilles heel for the Trump administration. I don't think that's happened yet. If you listen to the coverage, certainly the stuff coming out of, your public broadcasting or New York Times or traditionally progressive news sources, a lot of times what you're hearing about the information about these stories is from like an attorney representing the family. So you're probably not getting an even-handed sort of description of even the folks that were mistakenly apprehended. And I don't think anyone's making the claim that the vast majority of these folks were very another day here. So I think both things can be true. It's a liability for the Trump administration if it's sort of unearthed in the right way. But at this point, I agree with Tim that the American people are willing to make that trade-off because they're concerned, they're frustrated and angry about the immigration, the out of control illegal immigration the last 4 years, that they're willing to sort of overlook the mistakes that have been made thus far.
And I didn't have enough money, which is why I didn't go to the Ivy League, couldn't donate a building. But it's all good. That's the other way to get in. Informally, of course. That's a joke. But I think that's the big question, which will be who's going to be a casualty of this if the mistakes catch some ground with people in the Central Valley. Is David Valadeo somebody who's at risk? Is the potential of trying to catch Jim Costa out of the realm of possibility too? Is winning back the Gray Duarte seat out of the realm of possibility as well? And some of those other state house gains that California Republicans are trying to make in Sacramento too. Is this a difficult situation on this issue? And by the way, I want to say at the same time, we're looking at Cook PVI data that showed the most recent one that I saw switched David Valadeo from a D+5 to an R+1, which is very significant, and just showed maybe his seat was at less risk now going forward than it was before. Yet again, he still has to deal with this crisis, which I know he can't tackle head on, Tim.
Well, going back to what I said about, voters vote in their self-interest, I think if you have Hispanic Latino voters in California that feel like they or their family are in danger of being maybe profiled or targeted in that way, or could be subject to some of those mistakes. I think that then, certainly that could impact how you start to see those voters who had been considering and kind of moving, to be able to vote for Republicans in certain elections. Maybe those things raise question marks in their mind, and we see a little bit of a shift. But I think going back to that point is it has to become personal to individuals, and they have to feel threatened by it in some way, and those threats that they feel have to outweigh any other benefit that they see from another candidate that maybe is more important to them. So I think a lot yet is remained to be seen, and certainly I would say at the point we're at right now, I don't think we're at that level yet where people are starting to kind of personalize that and the mistakes have been big enough. But that can absolutely change. We're only in April of 2025, and we've got a long time to go before the midterm. So there's a lot that can transpire between now and then.
What was interesting to me was last week I walked with the marchers, I should say, going to Delano's 40 acres that were celebrating Cesar Chavez Day last Monday. And I think what struck me the most was a big support for the migrant worker, but the people that you saw marching in these lines were largely bus unions from Los Angeles, the Bay Area. You had a lot of local representation, a lot of people from Kern County that wanted to show up as well, especially those that are supportive of left-wing causes and Chavez's message and the history of what that was. But you said, okay, we're supportive of this, but you then get to the point and say, well, we don't like the policy, the way people are doing things. But there wasn't any it felt like it lacked something as far as that was concerned. It felt like it was a great day for unions as far as that was concerned and local union groups, but it felt like it missed that extra element of this is affecting me personally right now, or it's affecting a family member right now as much as it was. Let me get this union message out there, which is still an important message, of course, at this time, as we've seen with strikes in the last few years and the power of unions and the power of unions in politics. It was just an interesting observation I wanted to point out from last week. Tal, any last words on this topic before we jump over to something else?
Yeah, I mean, David Valdeo's seat, I think, in the United States is the seat that moved the most from, I guess in this case, it would have been Biden in 2020 to Trump in 2024. You see the complete, some of that was, I think, some of the depressed turnout among Democrats, but it's undeniable that there was a shift in that particular district. I do think that it encapsulates what we see nationally, and it's that the Republican Party is becoming more of the voice for working people. The people that come home with dirty jeans may have been Democrats in years past, but some of the rhetoric and now some of the policy you're seeing out of Republicans, I mean, they're picking working families over the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Literally, that's what we're seeing right now on the trade front, right? So with Valadeo, I do think that seat, I mean, having been his chief of staff, I never would have thought that we'd be in a situation where it was a plus one Republican. That I never would have guessed that. I assumed that the demographics would continue to degrade from an electoral standpoint for a Republican. It seems like the opposite is happening, where you might see a break in that either on the trade front or on the labor/immigration front, is if he loses that solid line among agriculture, which could happen if you see the inability to, retaliatory tariffs and therefore the commodity prices drop of our 60% of products that go overseas. That will be a problem. Or if you don't, driving in Kern County or San Luis Obispo or Salinas, see folks working in the fields. Because right now you can go see them today. You'll see those folks working. So there's not the fear that some of the groups are saying around being apprehended by ICE. They're out there working this afternoon. They're also not marching, by the way, and they're not protesting. They're literally working and providing food for the entire planet. When those folks stop showing up, you'll see a quick shift in agriculture. And that, if it's felt that Republicans are responsible, could be a huge problem for Congressman Valadeo. And I suppose up to 99 could be a problem for whoever the Republican nominee is against Congressman Gray. But that hasn't happened yet. If it happens, it'll happen quickly, but it hasn't happened yet, either on the trade front or on the immigration front in agriculture in this part of the state.
And last thing I'll say on that too, Tal, is that it feels like that's why everyone's so ho-hum or just they're just running to this idea on the benefits, which is we got to go after the benefits because that's what's impacting the working people in this county. That's what the Democratic groups have been trying to press, and some of the left-wing progressive groups have been trying to go after, which is let's hit them hard on the benefits on those tough votes. And I'm sure it's one of those issues that I know you were talking about the picture of Elian Gonzalez. That's one of those things that the second somebody who's relying on a check for some time, some issue is going to happen. You know that it's an opportunity for the ability for Democrats to pounce on something like that, and it may be more than one. Given how the suggestion that that Social Security is not run perfectly, and that other benefits around the country are not run perfectly. Now, I guess that's a good transition to former HHS Secretary Javier Becerra. He's now running for California governor, one of the many people that want to go in. We, of course, have the group that's up in Sacramento. Outside the group that's in Sacramento, you have now Becerra, Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor of Los Angeles, Katie Porter, former congresswoman, and Republican sheriff in Riverside County, Chad Bianco. Tim, is this a viable candidate? I know the point that Professor Keith Smith was making with me last week is those four, he's the only one that's won statewide office. Is that worth something?
Well, sure, it's worth something, and the fact is that, you've got the math equation on the Democratic side keeps building, right? So it just ensures that if the number of candidates on the Republican side stay really as it is with, Sheriff Bianco and maybe one other candidate getting in the race with any money, that we will see a Democrat versus Republican in the general election, runoff in 2026. Is there really will be no chance of two Democrats making it through the primary, especially when you have kind of notable candidates like you've talked about. Each are going to take a little bit of the Democratic pie there. I think that there is certainly opportunity for Javier Becerra. It does draw a little bit from someone like an Antonio Villaraigosa. Obviously both, male Latinos have been, have a notable profile within the Democratic Party. They both from Los Angeles. Certainly that doesn't probably help either one of them. There's still the big factor, the unknown factor, the unknown variable is whether or not Kamala Harris is going to, decide to jump in the race. That certainly would impact things in a big way on that side. But he's credible at this point. Always the big benchmarks are, can they raise money and be able to communicate a message statewide in California to the Democrats and differentiate himself enough from the other Democrats that are lined up there. And that really is something that we'll see as it evolves over time. Don't forget, these governor's races are kind of like, it's almost like courting investors, right? Because these Democrats, or even Republicans too, they're courting Democratic donors and supporters to invest in what they're pitching, right? In terms of their candidacy, and they really have to make an independent case for themselves, and it is hard for many of them because they've got such similar positions on the issues to really be able to carve out a lane and differentiate themselves between each other. And we'll see if any of them are going to be able to do that.
And Tal, it seems like the thing where, or I'd say maybe perhaps the advantage that Becerra has is his ability to say, one, I've sued the Trump administration 8 billion times because I know he's already campaigned a little bit on that. He was on Alex Michelson, our sister station show and show that we have, and talked about how many times he sued the Trump administration. He's also said, well, California's not doing a good job at being efficient with the way state governments run. So he can kind of go in that lane too, as well, if he maybe is running up against Villaraigosa or Katie Porter, someone like that, versus he can say, hey, I took this action in terms of these suits against Kamala Harris and say, hey, what did you do as far as that? You weren't able to beat him in the election or something like that, where he seems he can run in these different lanes. I know Antonio Villaraigosa too doesn't seem like someone whose main goal is to be anti-Trump, so he can kind of move around a little bit, but it really does come down, does it not, to Kamala Harris and whether she's in this thing as far as how everyone runs this race?
Yeah, it feels kind of like um, as the hours go on in a big wedding, right? So there's that moment in the wedding where they throw the bouquet and determine who's going to be the next one to get married. And as the night gets later and later, people drink more and someone spills something on the floor and then so and so leaves a little early. It feels messy. And then effectively you've got something like, the Trump administration is flickering the lights on and off if we're still in the wedding analogy, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. I don't see the Becerra sort of lane personally. I do think Kamala Harris, to jump back to my analogy, maybe she's like the WNBA, sister that can walk out onto the dance floor and grab the bouquet in front of everybody. So she might kind of really shake things up if she were to jump in. But I think as more time goes on, even her sort of brand begins to diminish because it just gets crowded. So I don't know what's going to happen. I do think there's an opportunity for either a self-funder or someone from Hollywood to come in and kind of Schwarzenegger the thing. Because I think as you get more candidates and it gets messier, then all of a sudden just someone who has really strong name idea can have a really great showing. Maybe that's someone from Silicon Valley who can write themselves a huge check as well. I think the likelihood of that kind of disruptive candidate rising to the top just increases with every day of it not being locked down. Like I don't understand why Harris doesn't jump in right away and kind of take all the air out of the room, but she hasn't done so yet. So I think she's leaving herself pretty vulnerable, and every day that goes by is another candidate that jumps in or a higher profile candidate that gets, thinks they could be the next governor.
Yeah, it seems like for every person like Bonta who said he, has indicated he'd step aside, you have Becerra and Porter in the race who are not going to step aside, and what they've said, and they've also said we don't care, we're ready to go and all that. Let me tell you the difference, whatever the difference is in terms of the pay to bring you versus Tim on, you make up for it in the analogies department. So if you like write a book on analogies, we'll pay you. Well, it'll probably come out to about even, I'd say.
I'll make tens and tens of dollars less cost of making a book in 2025 when you can just go on your phone and look it up on
That'd be
Gemini
perfect
or
for the Kindle.
ChatGPT. Yeah, maybe that's what I'm doing. I just have bad analogies typed into ChatGPT, and then they crank them out for me. So I appreciate that.
Well, as far as we're looking forward to events next week, as we're kind of previewing things, Tal, as we had talked about before the show, the big thing we're looking forward to, Bernie Sanders, AOC are coming to Bakersfield. We'll have coverage on that, perhaps team coverage as well from Bakersfield Now. Then, of course, we can imagine to have some sort of post-game wrap-up on that too. So thank you so much, Tim, Tal. Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, guys.
You.